The kitchen smelled like rosemary and roasted meat, and something underneath it, all that was bitter and sharp, like humiliation given physical form. My mother sat on a metal folding chair beside the industrial dishwasher, holding a plate of cold hors d'oeuvres that one of the catering staff had quietly offered her. My father stood with his back to the stainless steel counter, still wearing the wool coat he had arrived in, navy blue, threadbare at the cuffs, clean but old, in the way that good things become old when they are cared for past their intended lifespan. His hands were folded in front of him. His face was calm. He was looking at nothing in particular. They had been told to wait in the kitchen, not asked, told. What would you do if you watched the two people who raised you with more love than money, who taught you that dignity was not a luxury, but a baseline of being human, be escorted out of a rehearsal dinner by a woman in a $12,000 Valentino gown, who told them, in front of 47 guests, that there was simply not enough seating at the main table for everyone, and we must be practical about these things? What would you do if that woman, your future mother-in-law, Constance Harrington, wife of a private equity billionaire and arbiter of a social circle that included senators and CEOs and at least 2 members of European minor nobility, smiled when she said it? A smile that was perfectly composed, red-lipped, and absolutely deliberate in its cruelty. What would you do if your fiancé, the man you had spent 2 years building a life with, the man who had told you 6 months earlier that he loved you for who you were and not for anything you owned or came from, said nothing, did nothing, simply looked down at his champagne flute and adjusted his cufflinks as if the moment were a minor scheduling conflict rather than the public degradation of the people who had given you life? I will tell you what I did. I smiled. Not the smile of someone who is pretending everything is fine. The smile of someone who knows exactly what is about to happen and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. Because here is what Constance Harrington did not know. Standing in her marble-floored conservatory with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the imported French crystal chandeliers and the waitstaff in black tie circulating with trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than my father's monthly pension. Here is what none of them knew. Not Constance, not her husband Reginald, not their son Christopher, who I had agreed to marry in a moment of catastrophic optimism, not the 47 guests in their designer evening wear, watching my parents be led out of the dining room like contaminants being quietly removed. My father was not just a retired postal worker from a small northern town. My mother was not just a woman who had spent 30 years working in a textile factory and raising a daughter on a budget that required the kind of ingenuity that people with money never develop. And I was not Catherine Morgan, the soft-spoken archives assistant who had met Christopher Harrington at a museum fundraiser and had somehow convinced him that a girl with no family money and no social pedigree was worth his time. My name is Catherine Elise Adelaide of House Montrain, Crown Princess of Montvert, a sovereign constitutional monarchy in the Alpine region of Europe, with a population of 3.2 million people and a national trust fund valued at approximately 412 billion euros. My father is His Majesty King Philip Montrain IV, and my mother is Her Majesty Queen Consort Isabel, and the reason they were standing in a kitchen in Oxfordshire wearing old wool and holding cold appetizers was because I had asked them to. I had asked them to come to this dinner dressed as the people I had told Christopher they were. I had asked them to play the role. And they had done it because they trusted me and because we had all agreed 2 years ago when I left Montvert to live in London under a false identity that if I was going to find out whether someone could love me for who I was rather than what I represented, the test had to be complete. The test was complete. And in approximately 4 minutes, 16 seconds, a convoy of 8 armored vehicles with the Montrain Royal Crest embossed in gold on their doors was going to arrive at the gates of the Harrington estate. And this entire room was going to understand what a miscalculation looked like. But let me take you back to the beginning. I left Montvert on a Tuesday morning in September, 2 years before the kitchen, before Christopher, before any of this. I was 26 years old. I had spent the previous 8 years in an existence that was, on paper, extraordinarily privileged, and in practice, suffocating in ways that are difficult to explain to people who have never had their entire life curated by protocol officers. I had attended 4 universities under security details. I had learned 6 languages with tutors who reported my progress to cabinet ministers. I had been photographed at state events since I was 7 years old, and by the time I was 26, there were online forums dedicated to analyzing my clothing choices and speculating about my future marriage as if I were a character in a television show rather than a person with interiority. I was not unhappy. That is important to clarify. My parents were kind, intelligent people who had raised me with as much normalcy as a constitutional monarchy permits. But I had never, at any point in my life, been anonymous. I had never walked into a room and been assessed for something other than my title. And I had reached the point where I needed to know what that felt like, or I was going to spend the rest of my life wondering. So I made a plan. I worked with a single trusted advisor in the Montren's security office, a woman named Madeline, who had been with the household for 23 years and who understood exactly what I was asking for and why. Together, we constructed an identity. Catherine Morgan, British citizen, born in York, parents retired, modest inheritance, current employment as a junior archives assistant at the Whitford Cultural Institute in London. The documentation was flawless. The backstory was simple enough to be believable and detailed enough to withstand casual scrutiny. The apartment I rented in Islington was small and real, and mine in a way that the palace suites in Montvert had never been. I told my parents the night before I left. We sat in the private sitting room on the 3rd floor of the palace, the room with the blue wallpaper and the portrait of my grandmother and the window that looked out over the capital city, and I explained what I needed to do. My father listened without interrupting. My mother held my hand. When I finished, my father was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "How long?" I said I did not know. He said, "We will be here when you come back." My mother said, "Be careful, not of danger, of people who are careless with other people." I promised I would be. I left the next morning. London was a revelation in ways both large and small. I learned what it felt like to wait for a bus in the rain. I learned the price of groceries, the rhythm of a commute, the particular kind of tired you feel after 8 hours of work that is genuinely useful but not particularly glamorous. I cataloged medieval manuscripts and Renaissance correspondence and 19th century diaries, and I was good at it. And no one cared that I was good at it for any reason other than that it made their jobs easier. I met Christopher Harrington at a museum fundraiser 14 months after I arrived in London. I had been invited because the Whitford Institute had loaned several pieces to the exhibition, and junior staff were encouraged to attend for networking purposes. I wore a black dress I had bought at a department store, simple and well-cut, and I stood near the medieval manuscripts display, talking to a curator from the Victoria and Albert Museum when Christopher walked over and asked if I could explain what made an illuminated manuscript valuable. I could. I did. I talked for probably longer than was socially optimal about vellum quality and pigment sourcing and the particular genius of Flemish border decoration in the 15th century. He listened with an attention that seemed genuine. When I finished, he said, "That was the most interesting thing anyone has said to me in 3 months." I said that was either a compliment to me or a devastating commentary on his social life. He laughed. It was a good laugh, real and surprised, and I liked it immediately. He introduced himself, Christopher Harrington. He worked in finance, something to do with investment funds, though he did not elaborate, and I did not press. He was 31, tall, with the kind of clean-featured good looks that photograph well, and the easy confidence of someone who has never been denied access to a room he wanted to enter. He asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. I said yes. The coffee became dinner. The dinner became a weekend trip to Bath. The trip became a pattern, and the pattern became something I started referring to, in my own mind, as a relationship. He was thoughtful in ways that felt uncontrived. He remembered things I mentioned in passing, a book I wanted to read, a restaurant I had heard about, the fact that I found lilies overwhelming and preferred simpler flowers. He introduced me to his friends, who were largely people from his work and his university years, and they were polite and friendly in the way of people who have been raised to be polite and friendly as a baseline social skill. He did not talk about money in the way that people who are insecure about it talk about money. He simply had it, the way some people have good eyesight, as a fact of his existence that required no commentary. I found this, at the time, appealing. It suggested someone who was comfortable enough not to perform. He proposed 10 months after we met. We were in his flat in Chelsea, a 3-bedroom apartment with high ceilings and original moldings and a view of the river that he had purchased, I later learned, with a trust fund distribution on his 28th birthday. He had cooked dinner ambitiously and not entirely successfully, and he produced a ring over dessert and said that he had never met anyone who made him feel the way I did, which was seen, and that he wanted to spend his life with someone who could talk about medieval manuscripts with that much passion. The ring was beautiful, Edwardian, platinum, a central sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. I said yes. The problems began approximately 72 hours after the engagement, when I met his mother for the first time. Constance Harrington was 61 years old and had been married to Reginald Harrington for 34 years, during which time she had perfected the art of being the wife of a very wealthy man, as if it were an Olympic sport. She dressed exclusively in a rotation of Chanel, Dior, and Valentino. She had her hair colored every 3 weeks at a salon in Knightsbridge that did not advertise because it did not need to. She knew the names of every important person in a 6-degree radius of her social circle, and she knew their children's names and their children's schools and their holiday homes, and she deployed this knowledge with the precision of a military strategist. She invited me to lunch at her club in Mayfair, just the two of us. She said it would be lovely to get to know me properly. The club was the kind of place that had portraits of former members on the walls and waiters who had been there for 30 years and a complete absence of price indicators on the menu. Constance was already seated when I arrived, wearing a cream-colored suit and pearls and an expression of pleasant expectation. We ordered. She asked about my work. I told her. She listened with the focus of someone conducting an interview, and then she said, "And your family, Catherine? Christopher mentioned they live up north?" I said yes, York. My father had worked for the Postal Service. My mother had worked in textiles, both retired now. Constance took a sip of her sparkling water. She set the glass down with great care. "How lovely," she said. "It must have been quite an adjustment for you, moving to London." I said it had been an adventure. "I imagine so," she said. She paused. She folded her hands on the table, and the pause extended just long enough to become pointed. "Christopher is very precious to us, you understand. He is our only son. His future is something we think about a great deal." I said I understood that. "Do you?" She smiled. It was a beautiful smile, perfectly symmetrical, and it did not reach her eyes. "I want to be very clear with you, Catherine, because I think clarity is a kindness. Christopher is going to inherit a substantial estate. He moves in circles that are, well, they are simply the circles he has always moved in. The people he does business with, the people we socialize with, they have certain expectations." I waited. "I am not saying this to be unkind," she continued. "I am saying it because I think you should understand what you are stepping into. A marriage is not just two people. It is two families, two histories, two sets of resources and connections. And when those things are imbalanced, it creates complications." "What kind of complications?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment, with something that might have been pity, or might have been condescension, or might have been both. "The kind where a girl from York, with a degree from a polytechnic, and parents who worked in factories, finds herself at a dinner table with a cabinet minister's wife and does not know which fork to use. I looked at her very steadily. I know which fork to use, Constance. I am sure you do, she said. But do your parents? That was the first cut. Clean, direct, placed exactly where it would do the most damage. I did not respond immediately. I finished my water. I set the glass down. I said, very calmly, my parents are good people who raised me to value substance over performance. If that is a liability in your social circle, I am not sure what that says about the circle. She smiled again. You have spirit. I respect that. But spirit does not change facts, Catherine. And the fact is that Christopher is marrying into his future, and you need to decide whether you are prepared to be part of that or whether it would be kinder to both of you to step aside now. I did not step aside. I told Christopher about the lunch that evening. He sighed and ran his hand through his hair and said his mother was protective, that she had very fixed ideas about things, that she would come around once she got to know me properly. I said, she told me my parents would not know which fork to use. He winced. She should not have said that, but she did. She is from a different generation, he said. She does not always understand how things sound. I looked at him. Do you think my parents would know which fork to use? Of course, he said, too quickly, with the tone of someone who is saying what he thinks the correct answer is, rather than what he believes. I let it go. I should not have let it go, but I did, because I wanted to believe that love could outweigh the kind of casual cruelty that people like Constance Harrington practiced as social maintenance. The wedding was planned for June. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the evening before at the Harrington estate in Oxfordshire, a Georgian manor house on 300 acres with formal gardens and a private lake and a staff of 9. Christopher had grown up there. He spoke about it with the casual affection of someone describing a beloved but not particularly remarkable childhood home. And it was not until I saw it for the first time that I understood the scale of the wealth I was marrying into. The house was beautiful. I will give Constance that. She had impeccable taste when it came to interiors. The rehearsal dinner was to be held in the conservatory, a glass-roofed extension on the south side of the house, filled with orchids and ferns and white furniture that looked like it had been borrowed from a very expensive garden party. 47 guests had been invited, mostly Christopher's family, extended relatives, and close friends of the Harrington, a few of my colleagues from the Whitford Institute, and my parents. I had told my parents to dress simply. I had been very specific about this. I told them that the Harringtons were formal people, and that anything too flashy would be noticed and remarked upon, and that the safest strategy was simplicity. My father wore a navy wool suit that he had owned for 20 years, and a white shirt and a tie that was slightly too wide by current fashion standards, but was clean and dignified. My mother wore a gray dress she had made herself, well-fitted, modest, with a silk scarf at the neck. They looked exactly like what they were pretending to be, retired working-class people who had done their best with what they had. They arrived at 6 in the evening. I met them at the door. My father hugged me. My mother held my face in her hands and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. And then she said, very quietly, "Are you sure about this, Catherine?" I said I was. She said, "We will do what you asked. But the moment you want to stop, you tell us." I promised. We walked into the conservatory together. The other guests were already assembled, holding champagne flutes and circulating among the white furniture and the orchids. Constance stood at the center of the room in a floor-length Valentino gown, the color of old gold, holding court with a cluster of women I recognized from the engagement party, wives of Christopher's father's business associates, polished and poised, and wearing enough jewelry to fund a small hospital wing. She saw us enter. Her eyes moved from me to my parents, and I watched her face perform a rapid assessment. The cheap wool, the homemade dress, the slightly outdated tie. Her smile did not falter, but something behind it shifted, the way a foundation shifts when the ground underneath it proves less stable than anticipated. She walked over. She extended her hand to my father. "You must be Catherine's parents. How wonderful that you could make the trip." My father shook her hand. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Harrington." "Of course," Constance said. She turned to my mother. "What a lovely scarf." My mother said thank you. There was a brief silence, the kind that forms when someone is supposed to say something polite and is deciding whether the effort is worth it. Then Constance said, "Why don't I introduce you to a few people?" And she led my parents toward a corner of the room where two older couples were standing, and she made introductions with the brisk efficiency of someone checking an item off a list. And then she returned to the center of the room and resumed her conversation with the jewelry-laden wife. My parents stood in the corner, holding champagne they had been handed by a waiter, talking quietly to the two couples who had been polite but clearly uncertain about what to say to retired postal workers and factory seamstresses at a rehearsal dinner that was, by all visible evidence, populated exclusively by people who summered in the south of France. Christopher appeared at my elbow. He kissed my cheek. He said, "Your parents seem nice." I said, "They are nice." "My mother is just nervous about the seating," he said. "She has very specific ideas about how these things should run." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" He hesitated. "She is worried about the table arrangement. There are a lot of people and she wants to make sure everyone is comfortable." "Christopher," I said, "what does that mean?" Before he could answer, Constance appeared beside us. She was holding a small leather-bound notebook, the kind she used for planning social events with the rigor of a military campaign. She smiled at me. "Catherine, darling, I need to have a quick word about the seating for dinner." I waited. "We have rather more guests than I initially anticipated," she said, "and the main dining table only seats 32 comfortably. I have had to make a few adjustments." She paused. She glanced toward my parents, still standing in the corner with their champagne. "I think it would be best if your parents joined the staff for dinner in the kitchen. It is nothing personal, you understand, but we simply do not have space at the main table, and I thought they might actually be more comfortable in a less formal setting." I stared at her. "The staff are lovely people," she continued, as if she were offering my parents a gift. "And the food is the same, of course. I just think it makes more sense practically." I said very quietly, "You want my parents to eat in the kitchen. It is not a matter of want, Catherine. It is a matter of space. You have 47 guests," I said, "and a table that seats 32. Which 15 people are eating in the kitchen?" Her smile tightened. "Just your parents and a few others who will be more comfortable in a casual environment." "Who are the few others?" She did not answer immediately. "Constance," I said. "Who else is eating in the kitchen?" "The staff," she said, "and your parents. That is all." The room had gone quieter, not silent, but quieter, in the way rooms go when people sense that a conversation is becoming something else. Several of the guests near us had stopped talking and were watching with the carefully blank expressions of people pretending not to listen. I looked at Christopher. He was staring at his champagne flute. "Christopher," I said. He looked up. "Maybe it is easier this way, Catherine. My mother has a point about the space." "Easier for whom?" He said nothing. I looked back at Constance. She was still smiling, and the smile was the most honest thing she had done all evening, because it was not trying to be kind. It was simply triumphant. I smiled back. "Of course," I said. "Whatever you think is best." Constance looked momentarily surprised, as if she had been prepared for an argument and was now uncertain what to do with compliance. Then she recovered. "I am so glad you understand. I will have someone show them to the kitchen." She gestured to one of the waitstaff, a young man in black tie who looked acutely uncomfortable. He walked over to my parents. He said something I could not hear from across the room. My father's face did not change. My mother looked toward me. I nodded, very slightly. They followed the waiter out of the conservatory. The remaining guests were seated at the long dining table that had been set up in the center of the room. White linen, crystal glassware, silver cutlery arranged with the precision of a surgical tray. I was placed near the center, beside Christopher. Constance sat at the head. Reginald Harrington, Christopher's father, sat at the opposite end, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair and the permanent expression of someone calculating interest rates. The first course was served, oysters on ice. The conversation around the table was light, performative, the kind of talk that fills space without requiring thought. Someone mentioned a recent trip to Monaco. Someone else mentioned a property acquisition in the Cotswolds. Constance talked about the wedding flowers. the imported peonies, the specific shade of blush pink she had spent 6 weeks sourcing. I ate an oyster. I set the shell down on the small silver plate. I looked toward the door that led to the kitchen, and I waited. Because what none of them knew, what Christopher did not know, what Constance in her Valentino gown, and Reginald, with his silver hair, and the 45 guests at the table, eating oysters and talking about Monaco, did not know, was that 2 years ago, when I left Montvert, my father and I had made a plan, a signal, a specific, agreed-upon moment when, if I ever needed him to stop pretending, he would stop. The signal was simple. If I sent him a single text message containing nothing but a crown emoji, the pretending would end. I took my phone out of my purse. I opened the message thread with the contact labeled Dad. I typed a single character, a small golden crown. I pressed send. In the kitchen, my father felt his phone vibrate in the pocket of his wool coat. He took it out. He looked at the screen. He looked at my mother. She nodded. He stood up. He removed the wool coat. Underneath it, he was wearing a white dress shirt, simple and perfectly pressed. He reached into the inner pocket of the coat and withdrew something that had been folded there, a length of deep blue silk, embroidered in gold thread with the crest of Montvert, a mountain peak beneath 3 stars, the symbols of strength, clarity, and sovereignty. It was the ceremonial sash worn by the reigning monarch on formal occasion. He draped it across his chest, from right shoulder to left hip, and fastened it with a small gold pin. The kitchen staff, who had been quietly preparing dessert courses, stopped what they were doing. My mother stood beside him. She was smiling now, not the careful smile of someone pretending to be modest, but the smile of a woman who had spent 2 years watching her daughter be diminished and was about to watch that equation reverse. Outside, in the gravel drive at the front of the Harrington estate, 8 vehicles arrived in a tight formation. They were black, armored, with bulletproof glass, and the Montrain Royal crest embossed in gold on each door. The lead vehicle was a limousine, extended body, with diplomatic flags mounted on the front. The 7 vehicles behind it were SUVs, each carrying 4 members of the Royal Protection Service, 32 highly trained security officers in total, all of them armed, all of them wearing the dark suits and earpieces that signaled they were not decorative. The convoy stopped. The limousine's rear door opened. A man stepped out, tall and gray-haired, wearing the formal uniform of the royal household, midnight blue with gold braid and the Montrain crest on the chest. His name was Captain Lucien Brochard, head of the Royal Protection Service, and he had known me since I was 6 years old. He walked to the front door of the Harrington estate. He did not knock. He opened it, because doors, when you are carrying the authority of a sovereign state, do not require knocking. He walked through the entrance hall, past the portraits and the fresh flowers and the marble floor, directly to the conservatory. He opened the conservatory door. 45 heads turned. Captain Brochard stepped into the room. Behind him, 6 members of the Royal Protection Service filed in and took positions along the walls. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their presence was the statement. Constance Harrington, at the head of the table, stood up. "Excuse me, who are you? This is a private event." Captain Brochard looked at her with the expression of a man who has been asked an irrelevant question. "Madame, I am Captain Lucien Brochard of the Royal Protection Service of Montvert. I am here on behalf of His Majesty, King Philip Montrain Safor." The room went silent. Constance's face cycled through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, irritation, the beginning of alarm. "I think there has been a mistake." "There has not," Captain Brochard said. He looked toward me. "Your Royal Highness." I stood up. Christopher looked at me as if I had just removed a mask and revealed a completely different face underneath. "Catherine, what is happening?" "My name," I said, "is Catherine Elise Adelaide of House Montrain, Crown Princess of Montvert." I looked at Constance. "And you just sent my parents to eat in the kitchen." The door to the kitchen opened. My father walked through it, wearing the blue sash, the gold crest, the unmistakable bearing of a man who has spent 43 years as the head of state of a sovereign nation. My mother walked beside him. and she had removed the gray scarf and was wearing, around her neck, a necklace of diamonds and sapphires that was part of the Montrain crown jewels and had been in her handbag the entire evening. My father walked to the center of the conservatory. He looked at Constance Harrington, and his face was calm and terrifying in its calmness. "Madame," he said, "you called my wife and me working-class vermin. You sent us to eat with your servants. You told my daughter that we would not know which fork to use." He paused. "I am His Majesty, King Philip Montrain IV. My wife is Her Majesty Queen Consort Isabel, and you have just committed an act of profound disrespect against the crown of a sovereign nation." Constance's face had gone white. Reginald stood up, his expression a mixture of shock and the beginning of panic that happens when very wealthy people realize their wealth is not, in fact, the dominant currency in the room. "Your Majesty," Reginald began, "there has been a terrible misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding," my father said. "There has been cruelty, deliberate, calculated cruelty, and now there will be consequences." He turned to Captain Brochard. "Please inform the Montrain Ministry of Foreign Affairs that the Harrington family is no longer welcome on Montrain soil. All trade agreements, all business licenses, all diplomatic courtesies are revoked effective immediately." Reginald's face went gray. "Your Majesty, please. Our firm has significant holdings in Montvert." "Had," my father said. "You had holdings. As of now, those assets are under review by the Montrain Financial Regulatory Authority for compliance violations. I expect that review will take several years, during which time they will be frozen." He looked at Constance. "You told my daughter that marriage is about two families, two histories, two sets of resources. You were correct, and you have just discovered what happens when one of those families is a royal house with the authority to close borders, freeze assets, and revoke the privilege of entry to anyone we deem unworthy of our hospitality." Constance said nothing. She looked like a woman who had just been told the rules of the game she thought she was playing had changed mid-play. My father turned to me. "Catherine, are you ready to leave?" I looked at Christopher. He was staring at me with an expression I could not quite name. Shock, yes. Betrayal, perhaps. And underneath it, something that looked like the dawning realization that he had never known me at all. "You lied to me," he said. "I did not lie," I said. "I simply did not tell you something you never asked. You assumed I was no one because I worked in an archive and lived in a modest flat. You never asked who I actually was. You asked what I did, and I told you." "You should have told me," he said. "Why?" I asked. "So you could love me for my title instead of for who I am? So your mother could be kind to my parents because they are royalty instead of because they are human beings who deserve basic respect?" He had no answer to that. I looked at Constance. "You wanted to know if my parents knew which fork to use. They do. They also know which crown to wear, which treaty to invoke, and which borders to close. I hope that clarifies things for you." I walked to my father. He offered me his arm. My mother took my other arm. The three of us walked out of the conservatory, through the entrance hall, and out the front door to where the limousine was waiting. Captain Brochard and the Royal Protection Service followed. As we walked, I heard, behind us, the sound of Constance Harrington beginning to cry. Not the delicate tears of a woman performing sadness, but the harsh, ugly crying of someone who has just understood that the life she thought was secure is not. I didn't look back. We drove away from the Harrington estate in the armored limousine, the convoy of SUVs forming a protective barrier around us. And I sat between my parents in the back seat, and my mother took my hand and said, "Are you all right?" I said I was. My father said, "You were patient, more patient than I would have been." "I wanted to be sure," I said. "And now you are?" "Now I am." The Harrington family's business empire, I later learned, did not survive the month. Reginald's firm had been heavily leveraged in Montrain, real estate developments, a luxury hotel chain, several banking partnerships that depended on Montrain's favorable corporate tax structures. When those partnerships were terminated and the assets frozen, the firm's stock gay collapsed. Reginald was forced to sell at catastrophic losses. Within 6 weeks, the company was acquired by a competitor for a fraction of its previous value. Reginald and Constance sold the Oxfordshire estate 8 months later. They moved to a significantly smaller property in Berkshire. Constance stopped attending the social events she had once dominated. She had become, in the circles that mattered to her, the woman who had insulted a queen. Christopher sent me 14 messages in the 3 weeks after the rehearsal dinner. I read none of them. I blocked his number after the 14th. I returned to Montverre 2 months later. I resumed my actual life, the state functions, the diplomatic engagements, the work of being a crown princess in a constitutional monarchy that takes its responsibilities seriously. I was, for the first time in years, not hiding, and the absence of hiding felt like breathing after being underwater. I learned something in those 2 years of anonymity, and I learned something again on the night my parents were sent to the kitchen. What I learned is this: people who have real power do not need to announce it. They do not need to perform it or defend it or prove it to rooms full of strangers. Real power is quiet. It waits, it watches, and when it moves with the weight of centuries and the precision of people who have spent generations learning exactly how force is applied. Constance Harrington spent her entire life performing status. She wore it, she spoke it, she arranged dinner tables according to it. And the moment she encountered actual power, the kind that doesn't come from wealth or social connections, but from sovereign authority, she discovered that all her performance was nothing but noise. I do not forgive her. I do not forgive Christopher for his cowardice, or Reginald for his complicity, or any of the 45 guests who sat at that table and watched my parents be sent to the kitchen and said nothing. Forgiveness is not always the moral high ground. Sometimes the moral high ground is simply clarity. The clarity to see cruelty for what it is, and to respond with the full measure of consequences it has earned. My parents are back in Montverre now, in the palace, where they belong. My mother still makes her own clothes sometimes, because she enjoys it. My father still writes letters by hand to citizens who write to him, because he believes in the dignity of direct communication. They are still the people they always were. The only difference is that now everyone knows it, and I am still Catherine. I am also a crown princess. Both things are true. Both things have always been true. The only question was whether the people around me could see both, or whether they would only ever see the part that served them. Christopher saw what served him. Constance saw what threatened her. And my parents, dressed in old wool and holding cold appetizers in a kitchen, saw exactly what I needed them to see: the truth of the people I had chosen to spend my life among. The wedding, obviously, did not happen. I am not married. I am not engaged. I am carefully, deliberately alone in the way that people are alone when they have learned the cost of being with the wrong person. And I am all right with that. Because the alternative, a lifetime in a conservatory full of orchids and cruelty, married to a man who would watch his mother humiliate my parents and say nothing, is not loneliness. It is erasure, and I have spent enough time being erased. True power does not shout. It does not beg. It does not negotiate with people who have already demonstrated they do not deserve negotiation. True power simply is, and when it is tested, it responds. So tell me, what did you think of that? Did Constance Harrington get exactly what she deserved for sending a king and queen to eat in the kitchen like servants? Did you feel the satisfaction of watching someone who spent years performing superiority discover that real power does not perform? It simply acts. If this story of calculated cruelty, meeting absolute royal consequences, made your day even a fraction better, smash that like button right now. Share this with everyone you know who believes that karma is real and that dignity matters. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss a single story of justice, power, and the kind of revenge that does not need to raise its voice to be heard.